Hey everyone, welcome back if you're a regular to the Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg, where we will ultimately be covering over 1,000 unique mysteries spanning across over a dozen subgenres such as science, puzzles, true crime, missing persons, and much more. If you're brand new to the series, we are currently in layer 2, and I believe by the next video we'll be all done with this layer. And after that, I think we still have 9 more layers until we're done, which is just insane to think about. I'll link the playlist with the previous 9 parts in the description as well as the top right corner, so make sure to check those out as well if you're new. If you do end up enjoying the video at any point, leaving a like goes a long way in helping me out. So without further ado, let's begin. The lead mask case was a series of events that resulted in the death of 2 Brazilian men who worked as electronic technicians. Their names were Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz. Both men were last seen on August 17th of 1966. Both of their bodies were discovered 3 days later on the 20th on top of a hill. But the strange thing about them was they were wearing these crudely cut out lead eye masks, hence the name of the entry. It was a sunny but windy day on August 20th, 1966. Perfect conditions to play around outside. A young boy thought just that and took his kite to a Vintame hill. He was playing with his kite for a little while when he stumbled upon the bodies of 2 deceased men. Scared and confused, the boy sprinted back home to notify his parents of his discovery. The parents then contacted police who headed towards Vintame Hill, but unfortunately the sun was beginning to set and the terrain on the hill was extremely difficult to traverse, so police had to wait until the next day to actually reach the bodies. But when authorities did eventually get to them, they were met with a very odd scene. Like I mentioned earlier, both of the bodies had these lead eye masks as well as raincoats, and underneath those raincoats, the 2 men wore black suits. Both bodies were also partly covered in grass, but it didn't seem like this was an attempt at hiding the bodies. And placed next to the bodies was an empty water bottle and a small packet of wet towels. And inside the clothes were some receipts and a notebook with some cryptic messages scribbled inside. One of the messages translated to 1630, be at the specified location, 1830 in just capsules, after the effect protect metals, await signal mask. The police were quickly able to identify the men as Manuel and Miguel and reconstructed a possible narrative for the duo's last days. After getting off of work on August 17th, Manuel and Miguel boarded a bus in Campos to begin gathering supplies. The 2 made a sizable cash withdrawal from their bank accounts as well. It was said that they had enough money to purchase a used vehicle, and one of those receipts that I mentioned earlier on the bodies indicated the store that the 2 men purchased their raincoats from. It seemed that the 2 stopped by a city named Niterói, and along with those raincoats, they purchased a bottle of water from a bar in the same city. When police interviewed the staff at that bar, one of the waitresses said that both of the men seemed very nervous. Miguel in particular was seen glaring down at his watch several times each minute. Both men left the bar inside a black vehicle being driven by 2 unidentified men. This is the last time the 2 were ever seen alive. It's unknown what the duo did after leaving the bar, but it's presumed that they went straight to Vintame Hill without stopping by anywhere else. Medical examiners couldn't find any obvious injuries or signs of trauma on either of the men, but the thing that many people criticize is that the examiners did not search for any toxic substances, or rather they couldn't. Apparently, the coroner's office was understaffed at the time and couldn't handle the sheer volume of people that they had to look over, and so the bodies of Manuel and Miguel sat in their office for several weeks, and by the time they were examined, their internal organs had decomposed to the point where it was impossible to determine their cause of death. Seemingly at a dead end as to how the duo died, authorities set their sights on the intentions behind Manuel and Miguel's actions, hoping that at some point when retracing their footsteps, they'd shed some light on their deaths. There are a multitude of theories revolving around this incident, but it seems like the 2 most commonly agreed upon ones involve either foul play or aliens, or to be more exact, the idea of aliens. Police interviewed a friend of Miguel's who stated that both Miguel and Manuel were part of some sort of group that called themselves scientific spiritualists. The sequence of events that we just went over may have been some sort of ritual to get into contact with extraterrestrials. This theory says that both of the men were instructed to visit Vintame Hill, where their minds would be transported into a different plane where they could meet extraterrestrial life. And earlier I mentioned that there wasn't any sort of testing for substances, but it's frequently assumed that the 2 men took some sort of psychedelic drugs since they mentioned the consumption of capsules in their notebook. Manuel and Miguel likely swallowed those pills once they arrived at the hill before ingesting water, and when they began to feel sick, they thought that that was a sign of the arrival of aliens, so they put on their lead masks to shield their eyes from the light. And there are a few additional details that may support this theory. Immediately after the incident, several reputable newspapers reported a resident seeing a bright orangey UFO hovering over Vintame Hill. Additionally, that friend of Manuel and Miguel's that I mentioned earlier said that a couple months prior to their deaths, the two men were building some strange device in their backyard that was supposedly being used to contact aliens. This device broke down shortly after using it, but it's thought that it may have been the source of the alphanumeric codes that were also found inside the notebook. These codes could have been translated into the instructions that Manuel and Miguel were following. It's unclear how the two got their hands on those capsules though, or what they were even made of. But if you're not a fan of the theory that these two men were just infatuated with aliens and wanted to visit them, then there is the possibility that the two were just duped into visiting the hill before being robbed and murdered. Several con artists, possibly even that group of scientific spiritualists, may have viewed Manuel and Miguel as naive and gradually coerced them into taking part in a ritual that would have supposedly allowed them to speak to spirits or aliens. After obtaining the men's trust, the group gave them those capsules that were in fact full of poison when they picked them up from the bar in Niederoy. And once Manuel and Miguel died, the group moved in to take their belongings. Authorities never found a watch on the bodies, and there was no trace of the cash that the two were supposedly carrying. And there's one final detail that may seal the deal on this theory for some. Several years prior to this specific event, there was another electronic technician who died on top of a different hill who was also wearing a lead mask. It may be possible that this was another victim of the same group. But at the end of the day, both of these theories are simply speculation. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think that Manuel and Miguel were simply victims of foul play, or were they so enamored by the idea of aliens that they created their own means to contact them? Before we continue, I'd like to take some time to thank and talk about today's sponsor, Exter. Exter specializes in bringing sleek, high-tech, and durable wallets as well as other products. They were kind enough to send me out some of their items to try out, and my favorite is probably their premium aluminum card holder. I've been using this for the past few weeks, and it's more than spacious enough to carry all of my daily cards, being able to hold up to 12. This premium card holder, as well as their flagship Parliament wallets, all have this innovative trigger mechanism which makes accessing your cards a breeze. Additionally, these wallets provide RFID protection to block any sort of wireless theft, and if you're like me and find yourself misplacing your wallet constantly, Exter also offers this solar-powered tracker card which will emanate a ringing sound when you're searching for the wallet, as well as show its location on your device. All of Exter's wallets and other products are made from high-quality, environmentally friendly materials, and right now they actually have an anniversary special event going on where you can get up to 20% off their products. Use the first link in the description or my code DONTLOOKATME to get an extra discount on top of the sale. Thank you to Exter for sponsoring the video. So this next entry is kind of more like a conspiracy theory rather than a mystery. But anyways, Lewis Hamilton is a British race car driver currently competing in Formula 1 for Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton has a very decorated career, winning a joint record of 7 world championship titles. However, many people believe that Lewis should instead be an 8-time world champion at this point. There is this big conspiracy theory behind the race in China and Brazil in 2007 where Lewis had a 12-point lead that was promptly obliterated. And some people just accept this for what it is, a simple choke. But on the other hand, there are many people that don't think he actually choked, but instead there was internal tampering within the higher-ups. In 2012, Lewis was interviewed about whether or not he had found out what had happened in that 2007 race, and Lewis replied, "I didn't know at the time, but I do now. It's not something I can talk about." So in order to dive into this theory, I have to first give a bit of background on an incident in Formula 1 racing known as Spygate. Now, I don't actually follow this sport, so I might get a few small details wrong. But anyways, Spygate is the title given to an event where McLaren was investigated by the FIA for receiving confidential documents on their competitor, Ferrari. Former chief mechanic for Ferrari, Nigel Stepney, apparently gave a McLaren nearly 700 pages worth of information on Ferrari's car. McLaren was then fined $100 million. There was even the chance that the McLaren team could be outright banned from competing in the following season if there was any Ferrari DNA detected in the design of McLaren's car. So just keep that in the back of your mind for now. In the actual race in 2007 in Shanghai, it was raining, but Lewis was able to command a dominant lead on competing racer Raikkonen, who was racing under Ferrari at the time. So in the race, Lewis had skipped one of his pit stops as the rain was beginning to stop, and the team thought that new tires may have overheated on the drying racetrack. Surprisingly, the rain came back, which left Lewis's car essentially without any grip. This is when Lewis lost his dominant lead. But the rain did ultimately stop, and one would assume that the correct choice here would be to have Lewis's tires swapped out for slicks. But instead of that, he was kept in the race as Lewis's engineer didn't want him to lose too much ground on rival racer Fernando Alonso, who was also racing under McLaren. At this point, Lewis had worn down his tires so much that there was no tread on his right rear tire. So finally, he attempted to steer into a pit entry, but instead he accidentally skidded and landed in the gravel trap. But regardless, Lewis was able to place high enough to qualify for the next race. And this next race seemed to have started as expected for the most part. That was until around turn 4 when Lewis had locked up and ran off of the circuit. As a result of this mishap, Lewis re-entered the circuit in 7th place. Now, if this wasn't bad enough, Lewis suddenly lost his gears during his recovery. He was forced to coast for about 20 seconds while his team walked him through the process of rebooting the vehicle. And at this point, Lewis was now in 18th place with about 46 laps to go. But with a racer of Lewis's skill, he still had the chance to come back and win it all. However, there was yet another mistake. Basically what happened was Lewis's team had some miscommunication, which required Lewis to go through another pit stop to get his tires changed. Lewis ultimately lost the race. The overwhelmingly large number of mistakes across these two races left many people questioning as to whether or not Lewis was a victim of a larger political game. As for theories, some people believe that the FIA had sent someone into the McLaren team to sabotage their chances at winning, as they did not want McLaren to win the title following all of the drama and controversy from that earlier mentioned Spygate incident. Others suggest that McLaren was favoring their other racer Fernando Alonso over Lewis, and that was the reason why Lewis was being hit with this unordinary amount of mishaps. Then there's also the possibility that McLaren really did incorporate Ferrari's DNA into their car, and they thought that if Lewis specifically won the title, then that would bring too much attention to the team. Loyon is a cryptid that appears as a humanoid figure. It's said to haunt the woods near the Swiss town of Moulins. Apparently, this creature is frequently donning a gimp suit and a military cloak, as well as a gas mask that completely covers the person's face. And due to its appearance, some people doubt that it's even a cryptid, but perhaps just an urban legend. The person that became Loyon is rumored to have taken his or her own life in the woods. And the urban legend further says that in that exact location, there was some abandoned clothing left there, as well as a note in French. And the text is quite long, so I will only be reading the first bit. If you would like to read the entire thing, feel free to pause the video. When translated into English, the first sentence and paragraph says, "Dear Patrick Matten, not only are you a moron, but you are above all an assassin. You murdered a very harmless being who found in his walks a real therapy of happiness, a cerebral resourcing allowing him to face the responsibilities of his normal life. The ghost cannot explain this happiness, but you do not seem to know sa chère massage. You will discover that it takes everything to make a world." So people that believe that this person actually exists often think that they are simply a hermit that enjoys going on isolated walks. But whether or not Loyon actually exists is up for debate. Habyarimana and Ntaryamira were the Rwanda and Burundian presidents respectively, and were assassinated while they were flying in their Dassault Falcon 50 aircraft. As the jet was preparing to land in Rwanda, it was shot down by an anti-aircraft system. This event led to the infamous Rwandan genocide, and there's much dispute as to who was responsible for this incident. In the year 1990, the Rwanda Civil War began, and the RPF, which was the Rwandan Patriotic Front, invaded northern Rwanda from Uganda. Most of the soldiers in the RPF were either refugees or children of refugees who had fled the ethnic purges by the Hutu government during the Rwandan Revolution. The RPF failed in overthrowing the government, but they were able to take control of a border region, and as time went on, both sides began to realize that there was no end in sight and the war had reached a stalemate. This ushered in the peace negotiations of 1992, which were signed in August 1993, and came to be known as the Arusha Accords. And this agreement basically birthed a government that shared its power. This result was not to the liking of some, as the Hutu power portrayed the RPF as a force that wanted to enslave the Hutus and reinstate a previous monarchy. So as you could probably expect, it wasn't exactly a peaceful time leading up to the negotiations. So very early in April of 1994, another president had warned Habyarimana not to fly on April 6th. Apparently the rumor was that there were some enemies that had their eye on Habyarimana on that particular date. However, Habyarimana disregarded the warning and went on the flight. As his jet neared its destination, a missile ripped through the sky and struck one of the wings of the jet. The plane immediately burst into flames and came crashing down before exploding on impact. Several people witnessed the event and said they heard and saw the first missile launching itself at the jet, which was followed by a red flash and another missile. Due to how controversial the entire subject is, there are many theories that suggest that several political parties may have been involved. And some also suggest that it's possible that Habyarimana was simply collateral damage and whoever targeted the jet didn't even know he was inside. The Jamison family was a family of 3 people who went missing in 2009 and were found dead in 2013. Their names were Bobby, who was 44, Sherilyn, who was 40, and Madison, who was 6. So when the remains were initially found, authorities weren't entirely sure whether or not they were the Jamisons, but in 2014 they did confirm the remains belonged to them. But to this day, their cause of death is still unknown, and the circumstances surrounding the family's disappearance is quite strange. The family's pickup truck was found abandoned in Latimer County, Oklahoma, a few days after the family had been reported missing. Within the truck, police found the family's ID cards, their dog who was malnourished at the time, their phones, their wallets, a GPS, and over $30,000 in cash. And the Jamisons were not known to be carrying around large sums of cash with them, so this $30,000 was very suspicious. The police visited the address on the ID cards and went through the surveillance footage captured by the Jamison family's home cameras. The footage showed the family making several trips from their truck back to their home. It seemed like they were packing to leave home for quite a while. One of the officers described their movement as trance-like. Investigators took note of a particular brown briefcase that was carefully placed inside the vehicle. They believed it to hold some sort of significance in finding the Jamisons, but they were never able to find it. Additionally, the police found out that the family owned a handgun, but they also were not able to find that inside the home. So fast forward to November of 2013, 2 hunters were roaming around a remote location in Latimer County when they suddenly uncovered the skeletal remains of 2 adults and a child. The location where the remains were found was less than 3 miles from that of the family's pickup truck. And just as I mentioned before, it was impossible to determine a cause of death as the bodies were too far decomposed. But I do want to mention that there was a sizable hole on part of Bobby's skull. Obviously, the common assumption here was that Bobby was shot, which is entirely possible, but medical examiners said that because there was so much damage to the skull in general and the presence of rodents and carnivores in the area, they can't simply say Bobby was killed by a firearm. As buzz around the incident increased after the remains were found, theories began popping up left and right. Some suggested that the family faked their own deaths, or maybe they were part of some sort of cult and they performed group suicide. Investigators later realized that Bobby was in a heated lawsuit with his father, Bob Dean Jamison, claiming that Dean had threatened the family and even struck him with his own vehicle. This incident supposedly took place around November of 2008. Additionally, Bobby mentioned that his father had a terrible addiction to meth and was often involved in criminal activity. However, after questioning, police do not believe that Bob Dean Jamison has anything to do with the disappearance of Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison. The mention of drugs led some to believe that Bobby himself was wrapped up in illegal drug activity and that large sum of cash found in their truck was part of a large deal gone wrong. But other people believe that the family was depressed for whatever reason, which caused them to resort to substances. This could possibly explain the trance-like motion they displayed in the camera footage, and perhaps they were having some sort of hallucinatory episode leading up to their deaths. Finally, there's that theory about the Jamisons being in some sort of cult, which resulted in them becoming possessed. According to the family's pastor, both he and the family had seen spirits inside their home, and Bobby was apparently frequently reading from some sort of satanic text. So around 2019 in Santa Barbara, California, there are these mysterious bundles of hair that began popping up. It's unknown where the hair came from. It may be from a human, an animal, or something else entirely. And for whatever reason, one guy decided to sniff it. One person even suggested that it was some sort of fine root. Several local residents reported seeing people drop these bundles before running off, but those people who had dropped them were never identified. There really was very little I could find about this particular entry, so let me know what you think. Another person suggested that the hair was involved in some sort of tradition or ritual to ward off evil, but that theory, like all the others, is just a shot in the dark. So adding to our rogues gallery of serial poopers, we now have the running pooper. Somewhere in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was this woman who repeatedly returned to this resident's yard in order to take a dump. After the first couple of encounters, the homeowner thought that the person was homeless or something, but once they set up a security camera, he called it a malicious fecal distribution. Apparently, this woman has defecated on his property over 4 times, and it's always on the mornings of the weekend. The homeowner brought this to the attention of some local news outlets to hopefully deter the culprit from returning to his home. He has said that if she continues to visit, he's going to run outside and blast her with a hose while yelling, "Bad human, bad." So this incident has been covered into oblivion, so I'll try not to spend too much time here. In Chicago, Illinois on November 22nd, 1987, the television signals of 2 stations were hijacked, and during that hijacking, there was a broadcast of an unidentified person wearing a Max Headroom mask. The first hijacking occurred at 9 p.m. and simply had this unidentified individual swaying in front of some sort of metal background. This broadcast was also accompanied by a loud buzzing sound. So this first interruption continued for just under 20 seconds, and about 2 hours later, the second interruption occurred. The second intrusion was much longer and had the Max Headroom character speaking, but the audio was heavily distorted. The broadcast mainly consisted of this person insulting others and acting very obscene. At another point in the broadcast, the Max Headroom character can be seen bending over while someone was slapping his butt. To this day, we have no idea who the person responsible was, but there are many theories. Several investigators propose the idea that the job was done by someone on the inside. But as far as I know, any previous suspects have all been let off from any suspicions, and investigators have completely exhausted their list of possible culprits. One of the previous suspects was a man named Eric Fournier, who was responsible for creating the character of Shay St. John, which is just pure nightmare fuel, and if you've been around the creepy side of YouTube, you've likely seen their character before. Las Noches del Hombre Lobo, which translates to Nights of the Wolfman, is a 1968 unreleased Spanish horror film directed by René Govar. There are many people that doubt the film even exists, as the lead actor himself has never even seen the film. The film has never been released in theaters, and it has never surfaced online in any form either. Paul Naschy, who is that lead actor I mentioned earlier, was the only known member of the cast that was adamant that the film existed. Paul himself said that he had a large role in writing the script. He insisted that several scenes in the movie were shot in Paris as well. Supposedly, René Govar, the director, was killed in a car accident a week after the film was sent off for processing, but no one paid the service fees, so the facility held the film and eventually misplaced it. And if you go on a search for this René Govar, you will realize that there is no record of them working in the film industry at all. And even stranger, the other lead actors that Paul claimed were in the film apparently don't exist. Due to this, many of Paul's fans don't believe his claim that the film is real. Instead, they suggest the possibility that Paul may have lied about writing and shooting this movie in an attempt to boost his own resume. Paul Naschy was adamant that the film existed up to the very day of his death. So this entry refers to a woman wandering aimlessly on the Severn Bridge located in between England and Wales. Around midnight on the 27th of November 1988, several police officers noticed this girl near the motorway, and so they decided to take her to the station. They asked the girl some questions like who she was, where she came from, and why she was wandering around the bridge. But the girl never answered any of the questions, no matter how many times the police asked them. The police began to think that the girl may have been deaf or had some sort of disability, as she not only didn't answer the questions, but she just didn't speak at all. The girl was reported to be between 14 and 18 years old and was about 5 foot 4 inches tall. She also had reddish brown hair and blue eyes. The very next morning, police issued a missing persons notice, and it didn't take long for the girl's parents to show up and pick her up. According to the parents, the girl wasn't deaf, nor did she have any disability. She was simply in a very deep depression. And the girl actually was not a teenager, she was 22 years old. So I guess the mystery part of this is the girl's identity, as the parents requested that her name remained a secret. So this entry really has little to no information on it. Apparently back in the 1990s, Kurt Cobain made a song for the intro of the Ren and Stimpy show on Nickelodeon, but due to unknown reasons, it was never used. Many skeptics, however, don't even think the track exists. According to Billy West, the voice actor for Stimpy, Kurt Cobain tried really hard to get one of his songs featured in the cartoon. He was quoted saying, "One day this scraggly kid came in and said he wanted to write a song for Ren and Stimpy." However, he did later say he doesn't know for sure if that kid was actually Kurt. He just thought they looked similar is all. And similar to the last entry, this one also doesn't really have too much information on it, so I just thought I'd pair the two together. So this apparently features a 2012 video on YouTube that's a screamer. It was uploaded by an unknown YouTuber. Unfortunately, the video is no longer available, but it's said to begin with a person turning on a Nintendo 3DS and then opening up the camera in the device. The person then clicked the more pictures icon and a flashing Jeff the Killer image appeared along with loud screaming. Seth Rich was a 27-year-old employee of the Democratic National Committee who was murdered on July 10th, 2016 at around 4:30 a.m. Rich was shot twice in the back and died about an hour after. The culprit or culprits were never identified or captured. Following Rich's death, several conspiracy theories began to gain traction, including the DNC email leak in 2016, but Rich's family and superiors all came out and were adamant that the claims were fake news. Rich's family in particular said that media outlets were simply looking for a way to take advantage of Seth's death for monetary gain. Fox News was one of the media sources, and they were forced to retract their statements after their reporter failed to provide any evidence to back up their claims. This was followed by the family suing Fox News in 2018 for fabricating a defamatory story. Both parties eventually agreed on a 7-figure settlement in 2020. On the day that Seth was shot, he left a bar around 1:30 a.m. and around 4:30 a.m. in the Bloomingdale neighborhood, he was shot and then immediately transported to a hospital. Police speculated that Seth may have been the target of a robbery situation, as the area was known by residents to have frequent robberies. Seth's mother said to NBC that there was a struggle right before his death and that his face, hands, and knees were all bruised. Frankfurt Jane Doe is the name given to a woman whose skull was found wrapped in aluminum foil in 2004 in Germany. It's unknown how the woman died, but the prime suspect is a man named Manfred Seal, who is a suspected serial killer believed to have murdered between 5 and 9 women. Manfred died in August of 2014 at the age of 67 and was never arrested leading up to his death. He is also a suspect in several other ongoing cases, including Julia Schroeder, Christine Goldhagen, and much more. Frankfurt Jane Doe was estimated to be about 40 to 50 years old, and no other parts of her remains besides her skull have ever been found. There were many teeth missing from the skull, and the nose was crooked as well after healing from a nasal fracture. Additionally, it's suspected that she may have had a lisp. Other than that, there really isn't much that's known about the woman. Hey everyone, so if you made it all the way to the end, thank you very much for sticking around. Sorry for having this part much shorter than it usually is. I've just been having jaw pain on and off for the last like 5 months or so, and I think I'm going to be getting surgery on it in about 2 months, depending on what my orthodontist says. So sometimes when I'm just recording, I can't go on for too long. But that being said, the next part, which is part 11, that is going to be at least an hour long. I'm going to try and push it to like an hour and a half if I can. I am ahead on that script because this video was originally supposed to be much longer, and part 11 should be out in like about 2 to 3 weeks. I have some other videos that I have already scripted, so just need to record and edit those and then throw those out for you guys. So before we end the video, I do want to give a special shout out to all of my channel members for supporting me. Thank you to Sasha Wise, Ugly Guy, Shy Guy, -5 stars, 0 to 9, Jerome Reuter, and Hero. Thank you all so much for becoming channel members, and if any of you guys watching right now do want to become a member, check out the link in the description. It'll give you all the details on that. So with all that being said, thank you again so much for sticking around to the end of the video. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll talk to you all again very soon.